We are live.
Excellent.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We are here with Brigham McCown and the Aii team. We are excited for an amazing listening session focused on 2026 Surface Transportation Reauthorization. Brigham, I'd love to hear some introductory notes and anything you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining us today. And this is a multi-year process of surface reauthorization that occurs ideally every 5 years. And this is a big year. We've had a lot of changes, a lot of program updates, innovation, changes in technology, but many of the questions remain. Funding levels, the role of the federal government, the Highway Trust Fund solvency. All of these items are still front and present, as well as what should the funding levels be? Was the IIJA the new floor? Or no, are we going back to traditional highway reauthorization? And as many things in Washington, D.C., as many people as you can find, well, as many different opinions as you're likely to get. If you are here to hear what the answer is, I wish I could tell you. I don't know. I'd probably be somewhere else if I knew the answers to everything. It's an iterative process. And so the Alliance for the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure has been around now. Is this our 11th
This
or
will be our
12th?
12th. Yep.
This is our 12th year. Time flies when you're having fun. And we have tried throughout this entire process to be a voice of reason, not political, nonpartisan. If you look at our board, we have Democrats and Republicans on the governing board and on our advisory council. We are a convener. We pitch a big tent. We invite everybody in with all of the different opinions and try to find common ground and try to see where good policy can be found. And, I think, believe it or not, there is consensus on many of the items, but the devil's always in the detail. So, from our purposes today, we've released a draft highway reauthorization paper that serves as a framework. And I'll let Ben talk more about that. It is not the be all end all. It is more of a framing document than an answer document. And the purpose of today's listening session is to get feedback from you on what you think the good, the bad, and the ugly is. What are we maybe overlooking entirely? What things are positive? What things need to be reframed or changed? So, with that, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here today. And as I'm sure you'll hear from others, it's important that we hear from you because, again, we don't have all the answers. That's why we've invited you here to come on stage to talk, to give us your ideas. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think just a few notes on the paper. We'll put it in the chat. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, we'd love for you to download the link and read it, share it with your friends and colleagues as well. This discussion does not have to center on that paper. We really wrote it as a way to frame some of the discussion, help frame some of the thinking around the reauthorization. Brigham mentioned that there are these sort of underlying questions that have pervaded years of reauthorizations and never really gotten clear answers. What's the federal role? What's the appropriate funding level? And some of those things have evolved over time, where there was a very clear federal role for one element 10, 15, 50 years ago, and technology or policy or just material factors have changed. And maybe policymakers haven't looked back into it. And so our approach here is to say nothing's off limits. There's no reason we can't question any policy, any theory behind that policy. And so our paper is really inviting policymakers and industry leaders to look at everything inside of surface reauthorization, everything happening in the innovation and technology sectors that can be incorporated in regular practice or create policy frameworks that encourage innovation, and make sure that this next reauthorization isn't just a 5-year cycle that continues what we've always been doing, but potentially sets the stage for a new era of safer, more efficient, more resilient transportation. With that said, would love to get comments on the paper, but really we're looking for comments about, what's happening in your world if you're a transportation stakeholder. What are some of the operational and logistical challenges? Do you have policy solutions and proposals that you think should be front and center before even Congress? Like Brigham said, we're convening here, so we're hoping to hear your ideas and maybe even funnel some of them through our own research products and our own educational material up the chain. Brigham does a lot of work with the DOT. We certainly have relationships in Washington D.C. and with Congress, and we want to be a helpful piece of this puzzle, making sure transportation is safer and more efficient. So bring your ideas, your policies, your challenges, even if it's not a solution. If you just want to air a challenge that nobody has solved yet, that's a great contribution to this discussion. So yeah, Brigham, and then we'll open the floor.
Yeah, please. Thanks, Ben. One thing I neglected to mention at the beginning of this is the views expressed today by all of us are AII's viewpoints, and this is separate from my role on the U.S. Department of Transportation's Advisory Oversight Board that reports to the Secretary. We're doing this in our individual capacity.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, we would love to get some questions. Well, questions in the abstract. We will not be answering questions specifically, or we'll try not to use the time ourselves. But would love to get anyone raise your hand, share your thoughts. Please also feel free to use the chat. If you are in a place that you can't use audio but want to get an idea out there, we will certainly be using the chat as well. Just a reminder to everyone, if you are in a position to unmute yourself and make sure you have enabled camera and audio access, we will bring you up to stage to share your thoughts. And while we wait, I see that our paper has been added to the chat by our moderator, so feel free to peruse that as well. And don't be shy about being our first speaker. We've got a great live audience here, so looking forward to all the feedback. I know we've got some folks here who've been in the rail sector. See, it looks like we've got some trucking background in some of these live audience, so would love to hear your thoughts. Got a hand raised. All right, Cal Silverberg, I'm going to invite you to the main stage. And looks like we've got you up here. Go ahead and say something, Cal, so we can make sure you're...
My mic. I said turn on my mic and camera, but I'm not seeing the camera. Oh, hold on a second.
We've got your audio, so
good.
Nothing else. We can hear you.
As soon as how's that?
That's perfect. Welcome.
Thank you. Everybody has to be the first. I've always taken it upon myself to say, okay, I'll get the oddball question out of the way, then we can have the real discussion starting. Two things. As I sit here in our hometown of Fort Worth, Ben, we both know the transportation issues here very well.
Yep.
We know that an interstate highway works well when it's going through undeveloped area because the land is cheap, if not even given away.
Mm-hmm.
But once the land is developed, any expansion of highways takes away taxable property, pulls it off the tax rolls. We also have a fairly extensive toll road system here in Fort Worth and in North Texas. Basically, the highway was built by a private company, and the private company is handling tolls and making money off of the process. But to my knowledge, it is still set up so that it is not providing any It's not on the property tax roll, so it's not being taxed to the property taxes, hence making all the other users in Fort Worth and North Texas paying for services that the highway infrastructure company could help participate in, which would lower everyone's taxes.
Mm-hmm.
The question, as you and I have talked about for a long time, is what would the impact be of saying, okay, we can have toll roads, but let's make them private. Let's put them on the tax rolls. What would be the impact, public and private, for the tax base, the taxing structure, the tax rates, the overall taxes, and so on, in a way that may be able to, one, help put the real cost of highways into the operating revenue stream, meaning the tolls, and while simultaneously decreasing to an extent the tax rate that's on private companies, private property that's within the developed area. That's number one. Number two, I was quickly going through the reauthorization paper, and I noticed you did a work on train length. That's something I'm a little bit familiar about, and I haven't read the paper yet. That's going to be on my to-do list for
Okay.
today when it's this afternoon. But the key thing for me about train length is that if a train is too long to be digested in the yard, it's inefficient. And
Yeah.
so you've got the trade-off of, okay, how many people, how much train can you put behind one operating crew? That's the theory behind it. And you now have something like 16,000-foot trains that are taking 2 and 3 tracks, and the time it takes to fold together 2 or 3 tracks and split out among 2 or 3 tracks before you can start working on the cars. So there's a trade-off there that nobody has really looked at or examined. And so that's why I've always had a bit of a trepidation about having longer trains when they are too long, longer than the landing tracks they have in the yards or the put together tracks they have on the yards. So those are my 2 comments to hopefully get things started.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments. Yeah, the train length issue is particularly interesting. I live within, I don't know, a few hundred yards of a rail yard. And so long trains stopping and blocking the roads right in front of my house is very
Mm-hmm.
common.
Yep.
But it is important to separate anecdotal and personal experience from policy research and things like that. So I'd enjoy your thoughts on the paper when you have a chance to read it.
Sure.
I think efficiency is a key issue that does need to be examined. Obviously, we talk about a lot of freight rail issues are safety oriented. And I think that safety is the paramount concern, but efficiency is one of those things that we can't have good economic policy and healthy growing economy without things working well. And there are ripple effects where that can become safety issues as well. So
Exactly.
that's great. Yeah, I'm really interested in the tax question um, on highways. I wonder how much you would see, Cal, being federal versus state versus local in that question. And if you want to give a thought there, we'll.
Oh, we're talking property taxes. So
Yeah.
that would be local. In
Mm.
Texas, strictly local. Uh, Decades ago, there used to be a state property tax that in 1979 or 81, I think, was taken out of the state constitution because it had been set at zero for so long, people kind of forgot it was even there. And in a wonderful tax cutting move, uh, put out a constitutional amendment to take it out of the Constitution. And yet, there are several things right now, issues going on here in Texas, in the question of equitable funding of the state public school system. A state property tax would reduce the inequities to a certain extent because you wouldn't end up with local school districts giving abatements to companies to move into their area, as a financial incentive to come into their area, which in turn turns around and puts the property taxes on the homeowner, not the industrial user. It used to be fairly balanced. It's no longer nearly as balanced as it used to be. So there's that issue as well. But yeah, local property taxes would be just that, local,
Mhm.
county and city.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, we're going to think through as a team too, just the way federal legislative initiatives impact those local issues too.
Hmm.
Because there are clear delineations in policy for who controls which area, but often the federal government can help through different grant programs or different things like that enable local projects. Um, so I really appreciate the comments, Cal. We will remove you from the stage so we can invite some other folks up. Um,
Perfect.
but love the comments.
Thank you. Okay, first question is done.
Oh, first question is done. Now who's next? Um, and I would just invite everyone to also feel free to respond to things raised by other speakers. Um, we don't want to turn this into a debate, but if you have a counterpoint that you think would be effective or want to augment a point that was made by someone else, that's a great way to use this space. As a reminder, we are listening here, so would love to hear more people chime in and share insights, questions, problems, solutions, whatever you have. And we'll try to read the chat as well as we go. So I see we do have a comment here from Paul Dickinson. While I read this, feel free to request up and raise your hand. It looks like Paul says the focus I hear as a member of ITS America is all about highway digital infrastructure and how to best leverage it for multimodality and increase resilience. How might USDOT move more aggressively in this direction so we can then utilize this digital infrastructure for maximum real-time insight, improve safety, and reduce congestion? That is a great question. And I would also say, feel free to respond as listeners as speakers in the chat while we listen. And I'm going to bring up Andres here. Andre, welcome. Had your mic for a minute. There we go.
Hi, thank you. Maybe this is also a follow-up to Paul. So I'm Andres Chavalli. I work with Viavi Solutions. So we monitor and instrument very large fiber optic networks throughout the nation, actually worldwide, but in the nation. And a lot of those fiber optic networks are along highways, are along rail lines, and with increasingly with sensing technology, we really can provide a lot of data that can be very diagnostic of not just operations, but also hazards in, unfortunately, a lot of aging infrastructure that we have here within the US. So I was wondering, I know the paper doesn't have any specific referrals towards data gathering and monitoring technologies, but I think it would be important also to highlight that we do have tools that can provide intelligence that will help operators really manage these our highways or bridge, assess the integrity of our bridges more effectively. So again, in many cases, again, the fiber itself is the sensor. So I think if there was more collaboration between our transportation systems and maybe our network providers, we right now that framework doesn't exist, but if there was a mechanism, probably with the government involved in some capacity to at least facilitate some certain level of handshake, where we could take advantage of our basically optical infrastructure, that could be a very powerful tool for monitoring our physical infrastructure of highways and rails and bridges, etc. So I
That's
just thought it
great
would be
insight.
important to include technology as part of this
Yeah, I love that.
framework.
Stay on
Yeah.
the stage for a minute because I want to ask you a question. So this responds almost directly to what Paul Dickinson put in the chat about digital infrastructure. Um, and you mentioned, our paper doesn't really address specific solutions, but I think one thing we're hoping to do with this listening session and future sessions is collect the type of insight that might make for good recommendations in our future work. So I would
Perfect.
ask, what would you see as that government involvement or the federal role. Do you envision the federal government doing a convening session? Is it grants that need to be created? How would you see fiber optic infrastructure?
I think for starters, I think certainly a convening session would be important where uh, right now we have essentially we are very separate communities. I work with our telecom networks. We don't really touch our the assets where those fibers are, even though they were permitted at some point. So putting together again the departments of transportation and maybe the network operators that work in those, maybe we can start at the regional level, maybe at a state level, to make it easier. But I think just having someone that can facilitate that handshake is important. Because we're uh, telecom operators, they live in their own world. Department of Transportations, just for example, or freight lines, they operate in their own world. So, and I think there would be a fantastic synergy if they were to sit on the same room.
No, that's great. Would you mind giving us maybe a 30-second kind of overview again of what some of the practical applications of that
Yeah.
technology would be from a surface transportation perspective?
Yeah. So surface transportation. So let's say you have a lot of, again, traditionally when we lay fibers in the ground, and again, Paul here is an expert on this part. When we put fibers in conduits, oftentimes again we're not gonna. Let's say you have a highway or if you have a rail line, we're not gonna put the fiber significantly away from those lines. We're going to take advantage that there's already some access, and that's where our fibers are going to be along those conduits. So it ends up being that our streets, our highways have fiber conduits in them. So first, set of vulnerability, let's say for those who are in mountainous regions, those in Colorado, those in the Californias, let's say West Coast, Rockies, where you have a lot of topography. Uh, those conduits, there's ground movement. There may be some landslides, and we essentially those fibers that in those conduits, we basically can track a strain. Basically, we can track the deformation on the track before it becomes a landslide. We can say, oh well, we can feel that the fiber is detecting that the ground is moving. Uh, Before it moves too much, before I have a collapse on a highway embankment, I will flag the event and notify the the operator of that highway that something is occurring. So that's, I'm going to call it kind of like an environmental vulnerability. Uh,
Mhm.
it could be a fire. Let's say if there's a fire again along those lines. Let's say you have some aerial cables along a highway, and all of a sudden there's a brush fire in the middle of nowhere, and we essentially can use that fiber to detect the fire and basically notify, well, guys, there's a fire starting at kilometer 37.44. You should go check it out, and particularly if it's in a remote area. So sensing really acts as an alarm system. And of course, you're going to have other more operational aspects like, let's say, transportation monitoring. So you mentioned the previous question asked about rail. So right now, let's say with those fibers that are along tracks, yeah, we certainly can detect also things like strain, basically movement of the tracks that could potentially crack the track, just what we saw over in Spain last week. But we can also look at operational aspects of detecting the vibrations from the trains and say, well, where do we have any wheel flats? Are the trains speeding? Are the trains, is there a vehicle stuck in the middle of a rail intersection? So these are more operational aspects that we let the fiber listen to what is happening in its surroundings, and it allows the operator to act in a faster way, if anything, to download to decrease the downtime in
Mhm.
our infrastructure. So I think it's really very much in the along the lines of having a smarter infrastructure. I mean, we have the resources to do it.
Mhm.
We have highways that have already fiber lines, whether they're in conduits or area lines, and could be a matter of taking advantage of those fibers. There's a couple of utilities that do have access. That same goes with pipelines, but there's some utilities again that will have they operate their own telecommunications network, and those, for them, it's probably easier to take advantage of those fibers. But in many other cases, really the fiber that the DOT in Nevada may be using is probably they lease it from a network operator, and they only use it to send data from point A to point B. But really, there's a lot of potential to turn each point along that fiber into a very valuable sensor.
That's interesting. So it sounds like this is a solution not just for public entities that are government oriented, but private companies, whoever's
Of course.
managing or maintaining a given piece of
Yeah.
infrastructure.
Yeah, Europe has been doing more sensing activities, let's say, in various fronts. So certainly rail, again, the rail activity is more prominent throughout continental Europe, and you see more of these deployments where they're starting to track speeds, track traffic jams on their rail, but even infrastructure around tunnels. So every tunnel in Europe needs to have fire detection systems. So again, the same fibers that are along those conduits are sometimes you see on the cable base along tunnels that you're using basically for fire detection. It's basically taking advantage of that, just a single fiber optic strand, and monitor again the traffic conditions or fire conditions and again, some of those may be operated by the government, so maybe private companies that are operating their own rail lines.
That's really fascinating. Thank you, Andres, for the comments. That is a lot of information for our team to digest. I'd love to also hear if anybody else in the audience has either questions about how that might work in your world or ideas. Andres, I'm going to remove you from the stage, but thank you so much for your comments. He spoke about really applications across a broad spectrum of transportation issues: rail, road, highway, and that makes me wonder what other modal comments people might have. We've touched on rail a couple times, highway infrastructure. There's multimodality mentioned in the comment in the chat from Paul. But if anybody has other comments about intermodal issues or even ports and maritime, anything that's transportation oriented, I would love to hear those thoughts. And again, feel free to respond to things other people have said. In the meantime, I'll ask our moderator to put one of our papers on broadband infrastructure in the chat that touches on a lot of the things that Andres mentioned, but not in as quite good of detail as he shared just now. But we wrote a report last year broadening our view on broadband, looking into how fiber optic infrastructure can be leveraged. And it's already in the chat there, so feel free to download that. And I'd love for everyone to head to our research library, aii.org/research library, to read all of our reports, and we'd love to get comments on any of our papers, help us make them better and stronger, point out issues or questions you have. We want to be a helpful thought leader and convener, and hopefully make transportation safer, more efficient, and more resilient. And we've got a great comment in the chat from Brigham. Gonna let Cal read it himself while I look to see if we have any other hands raised. Again, really appreciate the few people who have spoken so far. We'd love to get some of these other folks to raise your hand when you're ready, especially if you're in a good place for audio and video. while we wait on that, it does look like Brigham's responding to points about property tax. Um, it looks Texas specific, but as we know, in the laboratory of democracy, we have many state approaches to things. And I would love to hear, maybe somebody in the audience is from a particular state who does a transportation solution well, or you have a complaint about yours you think could be improved. We do want to focus to some extent on the federal approach, but certainly would be open to state level approaches, maybe comments on private private companies or public-private partnerships, private operators. I know nationally, private entities operate a majority of our critical infrastructure, so there's no reason to be just thinking about state DOTs and the federal public offices. I appreciate that we have a great live audience. Would love to invite some of you to head on into the main stage when you're ready. I've seen a few people pop in and out of the live audience. I know people have meetings and competing priorities, but for any of you folks who are locked in with us, feel free to share. I would also say, you don't have to be a 35-year, 50-year veteran of an industry or anything like that to share your thoughts. We would certainly be open to those things, but I mean, if you've driven on the highway lately, you are a qualified person to speak about surface transportation. So, we're not just collecting really niche policy and public ideas here. It doesn't have to be legally informed or said like it would be a bill in a congressional hearing. You can just share thoughts you have about how transportation is going in your area, questions you have, you think Congress should answer. Do you think they're spending too much? Do you think they're not spending enough? Kind of goes back to some of the comments from our paper. We're really looking at inviting Congress to answer some critical questions rather than saying, hey, we've been spending way too much, we have a debt problem or this or that. Our paper is really about what is the level of appropriate funding. Brigham mentioned the IIJA. That upped a lot of spending levels a few years ago. And there are certainly a strain of people who think that should be the new floor, like raw infrastructure spending. And there's people on the other side who say you can throw all the money you want at a problem and it doesn't actually solve it if there are underlying issues. So would be open to anyone's thoughts on, are we spending too much? Are we spending too little? Should we share some of that spending with the private sector? There's no wrong answers here because we're in a posture of collecting all the feedback.
I do have a question I'd like to ask people. Ben, to your point, is we're talking primarily about, right, the federal funding mechanism for interstates and other transportation assets. And we know that really federal money is only about the last 15% or so of all money spent on transportation infrastructure, mainly because the bill in the 50s through Eisenhower was to build out the Eisenhower interstate highway system, and that was completed. On one hand, you have people that say we should abolish federal spending because it's not necessary. Others point to smaller states that don't have the revenue. The Dakotas come to mind. I don't know, which one, that you need an equitable system or else there's no incentive to build an interstate across or to maintain an interstate across vast swaths of land. Other people will say, well, you need to fund transit more because that takes drivers off of the highways. That record's a little mixed on whether that's actually true or not. But we have more people than we've ever had. We need more people to move around efficiently. We all see the reports every year from the American Society of Civil Engineers that say everything's terrible. A lot of that is certainly very true. Does it have to be gold-plated A plus? No. Is a C, C minus okay? Maybe. Is a D okay? I don't know. You have all of these tangential issues, and my question is, as we're looking at this, are states in a better position to deliver local dollars as opposed to filling up your gas tank, sending that money to Washington, D.C., to then have your own money sent back to you, and then you're not able to build anything because of NEPA restrictions because it's a major federal action? Should state money be exempt from NEPA, even if it goes to the feds and comes back to you? Transit is really important. Is that a federal issue, or is that a local or state issue that should be dealt with at that level? Are things like TODs, transit-oriented development, that encourages people to move to then utilize transit facilities? That's great. Is that a USDOT issue, or is that a HUD issue, or is that a local issue? Under the theory, if you have development around transit hubs, that gets people off of roads. These are all philosophical questions, and I don't, I hear both sides of it. I'd love to hear what everybody thinks here.
While somebody raises their hand, there's a comment that addresses some of that point pretty directly, Brigham. This is Aaron Shavel. He's a professional engineer. Federal funding for surface transportation is clearly needed. I think the concerning trend is that hyper-local important infrastructure is now entirely dependent on federal funding. And that's an issue we touch on lightly in the paper about how local projects are shaped or accessible due to federal dollars. It looks like Aaron is raising his hand to speak, so I'll let him elaborate more. Here we've got Aaron, and we have another hand raised. So, Aaron, when you're wrapped up, we'll bring up Jeff.
Great. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, sir. Welcome.
How's it going? All right. So I know Benjamin and Brigham have heard me go on this side tangent a little bit. So for them, it'll be a repeat, and for everyone else, hopefully it's useful. This is kind of the question that got me interested in this space in the first place, and kind of what drew me to Aii in particular. To Benjamin's previous comment, I actually don't think there's major contention around spending money on infrastructure. It's something we all interact with, and for the most part has pretty wide support. The question I always find is whether or not we're spending it in the best way. And I think that comes down to just fiscal responsibility of how we're spending these things. And a couple examples I'd like to point out. So I'm from New York. Right now I'm living temporarily in St. Louis, and they're making big efforts to improve some of their streetscapes, primarily through walking neighborhoods in conjunction with major urban parks. It's a really welcome change. But for the most part, we're talking about very simple curb cuts and sidewalk improvements. Basically the lowest level, the most lowbrow level of surface transportation, but surface transportation nonetheless. Now, these are fantastic projects, but they're being entirely paid for by the latest round of federal infrastructure funding. Now, my point being is this a project that really should have been required on money coming back from DC? And to Brigham's point, paid locally, gone to DC and back. And the question is, why is that the case? Why are we not able to take care of super local projects with local funding? Why is that being dependent on federal funding, where that timeline gets drawn out, and ultimately your cost for implementation is significantly higher because of those layers? Another example that kind of, I guess, highlight kind of this, void of value engineering and fiscal responsibility would be the Francis Key Scott Bridge. We've all seen in the news recently, the original estimates were in the ballpark, and I don't think I have the numbers exactly right, like $1.5 to $2 billion. The recent estimates are pushing $5 billion. That's not because the original estimates were totally wrong. That's not because no one knew what they were talking about, or inflation has gone up 200% in a year and a half since the original estimates. Is that our design parameters are constantly changing. And this is true for, I think, the discipline of engineering structural, environmental, electrical, across disciplines, is that we are now designing for the absolute highest percentile and safety and reliability. And there's something to be said for like that last little bit of marginal increase costs substantially more than the previous increase. And at no point in this process does anyone say, hey, do we really need to do that? Now, I have seen some of the structural drawings, and I've seen them evolve from 30% preliminary drawings to what they're at now. We're talking, 100 to 200% increase in structural sizing, and that's just, there's no guardrails on that. And I think that's something that I've seen across my career in all disciplines. So I think it's something that we need to look at as an industry on a whole, is how do we control for that? How do we make sure we're building things that are safe and reliable and are going to have this 100-year lifespan that we need to evolve into the 21st century, but at the same time are like being fiscally responsible and having good engineering judgment? I certainly don't know the answer, but that's the one thing as we go through this conversation that keeps popping up for me.
Yeah, Aaron, that's really fascinating. I so often think about challenges from a public policy perspective and think what the federal requirements are, what the law or legislative approach is. And I think having that engineering mindset is really fascinating. It just wouldn't occur to me to think what the structural capacity of the stuff is and how the plans change over time. I would think regulations or environmental reviews are what's pushing pressure on some of those things, and maybe there's engineering or different lenses to approach. I definitely want to have more dialogue with you on this.
And just to put a fine point on it, like the environmental stuff is definitely a concern. I think in speaking with some industry practitioners, that's becoming less of the headache. Like, even California is rolling back their environmental reviews, or like that in and of itself is something that would have been like an Onion News headline 5 years ago, right? Wow. The fact that that's the case is a welcome change. We're designing for, God forbid it never happens again. What if a Freightliner 10 times the size at full speed goes into a bridge, right? So when you start getting into the absolute worst case scenarios, you start designing things that are, prohibitively expensive. You would never do that same calculation on building your home,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good comment. We have another hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and remove you from the stage, Aaron. Right. Thank you so much for more conversation to be had later.
Sure.
All right, Jeff, you've had your hand raised for a bit, so I'm going to give you a couple seconds here before I bring you up just to make sure you are ready to go. But we are going to invite you to the main stage. And looking forward to your comments.
Hello, ready to roll. Yeah, I'm Jeff Mullen with the Association of American Railroads. And, there's been a couple of comments earlier in the discussion today, so I just wanted to chime in. It's important to note, first of all, that we are a private network. I mean, right now, yesterday and today, one of our members is spending tens of thousands of dollars to keep the pass open over Donner Summit in California, where there's been feet of snow falling. Clearing the snow, rescuing an Amtrak train. I don't have the details, but I think some trees fell and blocked the track. We had to get that out of there, that sort of thing. So the comment about long trains, it's a complex subject. I know the TRB did a study on that a couple of years ago. There's a lot of factors that are involved in train length, and it's not just yard capacity. It's also, line of road capacity, has to do with the type of the traffic and so on. I don't want to dominate the conversation today, but I'll mention that, my association has put out a paper on that. You can probably find it, freight train length explained on the website through the Association of American Railroads website. And I guess I'll just make a point too that, our competitors are being subsidized in many ways by governments in terms of research into autonomous vehicles and digitalization of the highways and so forth. That's not to say we're not receiving benefit as well. In some cases, if you look at, for example, Chicago, there's a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure program going there to benefit not only freight rail and passenger rail, but wayside communities and so forth. It's called CREATE. If you're not familiar with it, you can just go into Chicago CREATE and read all about it. And secondly, there was discussion about fiber optics co-located along the railroads. That's certainly true. And we have been doing research. We have a facility out in Colorado that has studied the possibility of detecting, let's say, a flat wheel on a train that's pounding the rail, being picked up by a fiber optic system that's actually there for communication. It's not a wayside detector system, but it can be reused for that. So certainly a lot of interesting possible developments there. So that's it for my comments. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I'm going to drop a couple of the links you mentioned into the chat, so we'll have them preserved and other people can read them. One question, you mentioned your competitors. Is that competitors to freight rail, meaning trucking and other modal conveyances?
Yeah. I mean, there are autonomous trucks already operating on the highways, somewhat in a pilot project mode, but doesn't take a lot of imagination to see where that's headed there. And, at the same time as I started my comments, we operate and pay for our own network, while our competitors, are benefiting from these, wonderful enhancements that can certainly add to safety and efficiency. So I'll quickly point out too that motor carriers are our number one customer. So we're not adversarial. We're just pointing out the lay of the land and what's happening.
Yeah, that's really good context. I appreciate it. I'll remove you from the stage to let other folks join up. And while I do, I'm going to marry two comments into one. Jeff was just mentioning that train length issue is more than just the freight yard proximity, and Cal initially raised that. When he did, I mentioned that I live right next to a freight yard, so I frequently have a blocked crossing. And marrying this to something Aaron said about local infrastructure development being a challenge without federal dollars, I've pursued getting a crossing, like a railroad crossing with arms installed at the local one by my house, and I've been told that the city would not pay for it, and the county would not pay for it, and the state would not pay for it. They would only do it if the federal government provided a grant. Which, again, totally anecdotal, not speaking this from AII, just my personal experience. But it does resonate with what Aaron shared, that a lot of times local projects don't get done, whether it's a preference thing or political, I don't know. But that's a problem I would want to solve. Have we created this balance where the federal government is just expected to fund infrastructure generally? That's a question I would want answered, and I would want Congress to think about. How do we shift that expectation to where everyone feels that they have not only the right, but the duty to invest in infrastructure? That we're not just waiting for a top-down solution, especially for local infrastructure. I think that's something I'm going to look into. I think it resonates with what Aaron shared and intersects with what a lot of the other comments have been. Another thing, and again, I'm just continuing to invite people to join in the conversation as they are ready. But Jeff raised the issue of autonomous trucking coming online. One of the notes that we have in our paper addresses driver shortages, some of the issues on the roadways with commercial trucking. Obviously, that is related. If there's driver shortages and people think technology can fill that gap, it might be a solution to take some of the pressure off the need for drivers. But I'd love to hear anyone's comments on trucking, on freight movement, whether it's rail or not. Those are some of the things that we are thinking about, and we started to put them into the paper as ways to frame the discussion for Congress, for other stakeholders. But like Brigham shared, it's not the end all be all. It's not the answer. We're putting it out there as a way to think more strategically about our infrastructure investment and policy, and not just continue how we've been doing things or putting money towards problems that have structural challenges. But any comments on trucking would be interesting to me personally, and I know our team would enjoy dissecting that issue further. There's been still some more engagement in the chat, so if anyone sees anything there or just wants to put a note in the chat, I would challenge everyone in our live audience that even if you're on another call or busy or too shy to speak up, put your ideas in the chat. That chat will stay here. It's part of our live session, so we'll be able to consult it after the fact, and we would love to see questions, comments, resources. If you have hyperlinks they work in the chat as well. All 21 folks that are currently in the live audience, you are now hereby challenged to give us a comment, at least written. Probably only have time for one or two others since we're coming up on the hour, but don't let that be a block to you actually requesting up and speaking. And contact information is a great addition to the chat as well. Thank you, Andres, for your comments and also for the chat there. If anybody wants to reach out to us after the fact or has questions or anything like that, please feel free to use the chat. I'll have our moderator put some of our contact information in as well. You can find us at our website, our research library. You can certainly email me at bdurker@aii.org. We'll put that in the chat as well. But this is really just an opening invitation to discussion. AII is a convener, and we're hoping to convene many more conversations after this, really with the hope that we will be able to put out more interesting reports, educate congressional staff and committees, and raise these issues as we get them to other industry leaders, other policy leaders. We're an independent third-party organization, so we want to take a step back and look at these issues from a fresh set of eyes. If you are a invested industry stakeholder, but you think we could partner and look at the issue, we are certainly happy to do that. Appreciate the contact information being shared there. Aaron, who is one of our policy fellows, is also an engineer and has his own expertise. So please do feel free to reach out. He made some great comments. So if you have questions about those things in particular after this, that would be great. Appreciate it, Cal. Your contact information as well. All right, let's get one more person to raise some comments before this listening session ends. Really on anything, federal, transportation, state, local. Certainly if you have something related to the bill working its way through Congress, things that they should or shouldn't include in it. Our paper didn't go that policy level specific, but you certainly can. I'd be happy to hear those thoughts. There's a lot of ongoing debates in real time about things that should be included and things that should not. So if you have a comment like that, we'd love to hear not only what you think should or shouldn't, but the why behind it. Who's going to be our brave final speaker? I think a lot of the people in the chat who have commented and in our live audience would benefit from knowing one another. So that's another great way that AII serves as a convener. Andres mentioned convening state DOTs with, fiber providers and things like that. If what we can do is serve by helping people get in the same room, we certainly want to do that, because we think if people are talking, that leads to better infrastructure solutions, better innovation, even better public policy and regulation. So hopefully some of the people in the live audience see one another and maybe even reach out. But we are still needing one more person to speak. Who is our last person? Before I get my last sip of coffee and don't have another way to clear my throat. All right, if we don't get somebody to speak out loud, my challenge is at least 5 more comments in the chat. So if you're still with us, if you can hear me, Really do appreciate everyone joining in the live audience. Certainly, we can't expect that everyone will speak at every session. You just attending is helpful, and it's validating to know this is such an important topic and people care about it. We do hope you'll read our report. Go through the chat when you have time. We will share this session live, a live session on our YouTube channel as well. But would love to get some more chats. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, any thoughts, including your own company or organization website? We want to use this session as an opportunity to do a deeper dive on research. So if you weren't able to speak, we can go down the rabbit hole of your organization and your work products too, as though you spoke, if you put those resources in the chat. So please feel free to do that. And I think Brigham mentioned at the top that we'll plan to do many more surface transportation reauthorization oriented events this year. It's certainly not a foregone conclusion that the bill will be passed before the deadline in, I believe it's September. It's an election year, so we know both House and Senate might turn over or change, or majorities grow, depending on how all that shakes out. So our paper really was an opening discussion in case any Congress works on that bill. It's certainly not written to a Republican Congress or with the expectation that it will be this Congress. These are questions that need answers on a bipartisan basis, whichever breakdown the parties are Congress. So we are eager to hear your thoughts because we do plan to host more dialogues, more listening sessions. We're going to try to take some of the feedback from this session and put it into additional reports, policy papers, blogs, briefs that we can use on Capitol Hill. So really, we depend on the insights and information from our audience to help shape some of those things. We certainly have expertise in the policy realm, but not all of us are engineers. Not all of us are lifelong stakeholders in a given sub-industry of transportation. So, alrighty, well, we've hit the hour here, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. Really do appreciate the people who have spoken, people who have chatted. You can still use the chat all the way through me ending this call. So if you can still hear my voice, throw your information in the chat, throw your website in the chat, put a last minute question or last minute idea, even if it's half baked, we'll take it. Thank you so much. This has been a listening session hosted by the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure. We are a public policy think tank dedicated to infrastructure and really seeking innovative solutions to our current and future infrastructure challenges. We pitch a big tent and we are convening as an independent third party. So really just appreciate everyone's participation, and we hope to bring more informed perspectives to Congress, to the federal government, and to state and local DOTs and governments as well. So please head over to aii.org, look at our policy materials, follow us on social media, and look out for future events. We will certainly be hosting more, and we'll have more featured speakers as well. So there will be new and different dynamics for every session. So join us again, even if you join this time. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. I will be ending it here. Have a great weekend. It is Friday, so enjoy that. Thank you so much again for your time, and we will continue to research and educate on critical public policy challenges related to transportation and infrastructure.